Hey, welcome to DC Signal to Noise. A little experiment here, trying to do things live. We aren't into the show yet. In fact, let's bring in Jim Wiesmeyer here because, as we always do, Jim. First of all, thanks for helping out on this little experiment here. When we're going to invite people to watch in live as we record the show, and see the sausage making that goes on behind the scenes before we do it. And speaking of sausage making, we have neglected mentioning on the show that since we started doing this in video, we've got another actor behind the scenes helping putting all this together. And that's Eric Crowley, who's working behind the scenes producing the video portion of this for us. So we appreciate everything he's been doing on that. So before we get into the actual podcast, first I encourage you, if you're watching, to make a comment if there's something you want us to talk about today. We can do that. So make a comment, and we'll be watching that as we go through the show. And also, as we always do every week before we start recording, Jim and I have shared some emails about what we want to talk about today. But Jim, anything on the latest list or not on the latest list that you want to talk about today?
Well, Trump's tweet, he tweeted that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, maybe that was on your list. I can't.
Yeah, it was
remember.
on the list. Yeah,
it's been such a day. Had tweeted that she was trying to block the $30 billion, replenishment for the CCC. So we have to get into that.
All right, and we will. So, all right, well, with no further ado, let's go ahead and Eric, get ready to record the show. And my camera has disappeared.
Live and unprepared.
The glories of live production. See if we can fix it. There it is, back again. I'm not sure what it's doing.
We're there.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and
sure.
We'll skip the slate this time, Eric, and just go to record in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Friday. Welcome back to DC Signal to Noise, and a special edition today, Jim. We're trying out live streaming the DC Signal to Noise. So we'll see how the test goes today, and maybe we'll be doing this some more. So appreciate those folks who are tuning in on the AgriTalk Facebook page, the AgWeb Facebook page, and Ag Day Facebook page. But Jim, let's get right into a long list of issues today. Of course, what's been consuming the news today is we finally, about a week and a half late, got details of the Coronavirus Food Aid Program Phase 2. President Trump announced it last night at a campaign event in Wisconsin, said it was going to be $13 billion. Then USDA has an announcement, press release this morning, and then came and talked on AgriTalk. Bill Northey, the undersecretary, talked about it on AgriTalk this morning, and now it's up $14 billion. What did we get in CFAP 2?
Up to $14 billion. I think they both may be correct, John, because maybe the Trump people gave him, once you back off the payment caps, in other words, the reduction in payments for those hitting the payment cap. At least that's what I was told. So honestly, they both could be correct. Very general. Of course, please go to profarmer.com for the details, the summary. Listen to AgriTalk from this morning, where USDA official Bill Northey gave a very good recap of this program, and it tells me they listened to not just a few, but many complaints about the initial operation of CFAP 1. It is not the simplest type of program, but they went to more revenue based livestock program. They have some additional crops in the mix for CFAP 2, and they have a different method of payment, but it all includes 2020 crops, but not all the production. They have a percent of the crop likely marketed. And I know in the case of corn, I'm just going from memory, 40%. So farmers are going to have to use their calculators on this one. And Northey told me that as soon as Monday, USDA on their page, on their CFAP2 page, will have a calculator up so individual impacted producers, both from the crop side, specialty crop side, livestock, dairy, broilers, eggs, they can plug in their own data to see, how they will be impacted from this program, John.
Yeah, and as we've talked about before, in CFAP 1, that calculator made all the difference. It was a very, from a user standpoint, very murky process until they came out with that calculator. And then it made things a lot more clear because you could see how it impacted you directly. A couple of key resources I want to throw in as well. You mentioned that interview that Chip Flory did with Bill Northey from USDA. Those who subscribe to the Signal to Noise podcast notice that popped up as a special edition earlier today that is available as part of the Signal to Noise podcast. In fact, the interview that aired on AgriTalk was previously recorded. They had to cut it down a little bit for time. The one that's available in the Signal to Noise podcast is that interview in its entirety, so you get a few extra things in that interview. And also, yes, definitely go to profarmer.com for analysis. Also on agweb.com, Paul Nefer, CPA, has got some great analysis on agweb.com. You'll see it right there on the front page as well. But Jim, you were right on that this is a revenue-based program, which I think solves a lot of the problems that we saw with CFAP 1.
I think so. There are some things on the wish list that they didn't go with, such as the payment cap, a higher payment cap, if not no payment cap. But we asked Bill Northey about that. Will that be on the tape? That's on Signal to Noise?
Indeed, yes.
Oh, good, because I don't think that was on Yes, it was on AgriTalk. This has been quite a day. So I would listen to that one, that he gave a defense of what they did and why they did it. But I still think, especially from a livestock producer sector, and mainly hog producers, I think that they needed to get that payment cap higher. But it is what it is, as we say.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. Northey made a point of noting this morning that this is the most comprehensive ag program he has ever seen. That he said the only things it doesn't account for are it covers alfalfa but not other hay, and it doesn't cover basically companion animals or non-food animals. And he said other than that, people are covered.
And crops that really didn't show a price impact. Even though they could have qualified, they just, don't. But this could be the beginnings of an overarching approach to new farm policy. Not quite sure, because lawmakers will always want to get their fingers involved, John. But as you said, this is pretty comprehensive, and it shows USDA's analysts, their top economist, Ag Secretary Perdue, have actually learned from their prior, programs, from all the way from the, trade mitigation program, the MFP program, the initial iteration of CFAP 1, which was a lot to be desired at the beginning, and they kept on fine tuning it and got it about as good as they could have, and then much improved, CFAP 2.
And wheat growers very happy that this includes all grades of wheat now.
Yeah, you wonder now. They've had a price decline. I asked Bill Northey that can those classes of wheat who were not eligible in CFAP 1 but now eligible for CFAP 2, can they go back and get CFAP 1? He said no. They're two separate programs, and really CFAP 2 is on 2020 crop. And he said in the instance of some wheat classes, they clearly had defined price downturns, where at the time they announced CFAP 1, they had elevated prices at that particular time. So he had a pretty good reason why.
Hey, mentioned again that for those listening online, we are streaming this live for the first time, and gotten some input there. Appreciate Jim Smith, a good friend of the show, checking in and watching today. And also a question here from Taylor Leach, Jim, wanting to know, essentially this was announced in Wisconsin last night. It got a warm reception there. Taylor wants to know how this would impact the dairy industry in particular.
Well, we have the payment rates, we have the calculation out there. I think it's good news again for the dairy side. What is not good news still is that more in the case of the hogs, that they didn't have indemnity payments because they still want Congress to do the legislative authority for them. That all those producers who had to cull. In the case of dairy, the spilt milk as well. But I don't want to get too wonky in the audio and video podcast on dairy other than to say go through the calculations. But again, I think with the payment rates for the milk, et cetera, it looked pretty good to me. So I think that's the initial indication that I've got. John, do we want to go through any specifics on dairy or not?
Yeah, it go down that road a little bit. I mean, what are some of the things that they can look forward to in that
Well,
industry?
I've got to look at my side. I've just been bogged down with Pro Farmer newsletter and things like that. That's why I'm bowing to the summary, because I'm not tilting when my speaker mode, when I give out go out and give speeches, prepared for the specifics at this particular time for dairy. But I can go let me just say live here, and I don't think you can see me here, but let me go just to the payment rates. Let me just go through quick calculations here. Let me go down to dairy. This is on here. Dairy operations applying let's see, you got to go through their noise, if you will. The payments, the producer's total actual milk production from April 1 this year to August 31 this year, multiplied by the payment $1.20 per hundredweight, and the producer's estimated milk production from September 1 this year to December 31, 2020, based on the daily average production from April 1, 2020 through August 31 this year, multiplied by 122, multiplied by a payment rate of $1.20 per hundredweight. That's the calculation for the payments for cow milk, and it's going to be equal to the sum of what I just read. And that's why you don't want to get too technical because it's harder to follow. But I think a dairy producer would know the numbers. The key there is that $1.20 per hundredweight and the time frames there on the estimated milk production date lines.
And again, a reminder that USDA is planning on coming out with that calculator Monday, which will make that a whole lot less complicated. You can put in your data. And
yes. And I do want to add, John, that any dairy operations applying, they have to be in business of producing and commercially marketing milk at the time of application. That begins as soon as Monday.
Okay, yeah. And yes, that is a key. That sign up starts next week. The same payment caps that we've had in place for other programs, $250,000 or $250,000, as Chip Flory said this morning. You guys gave him a heck about it. I just only say that because Chip, I know, is watching right now.
They would faint. We had a lot of producers fainted when they heard that, probably.
Yes, indeed. Now this is estimated to be at $14 billion. A couple of questions I'm going to wrap together in this, Jim. One is, we still haven't spent everything from the first round of CFAP. There's money left there, but also $14 billion also happens to be what's left in authority at the Commodity Credit Corporation. Does this put some pressure on CCC, because there are other items that have to be paid out of CCC?
I think it does. And this is why this week it was a focus of a multi-coalition letter from the ag community to the leaders in Congress to really put the replenishment of CCC funding as part of the continuing resolution, what we also call stopgap spending bill, to make sure the government is funded at the beginning of the fiscal year, October 1. The White House did request, $30 billion, to the replenishment level. But now, again, fast-moving events. President Trump tweeted this morning that Pelosi was trying to stop that replenishment. Now, that needs to be further checked out. But a White House person told me he's going to be in Minnesota tonight, and he's going to hit that hard, apparently. So I don't know whether Pelosi had to get some movement from some of her farm state colleagues on this one, and I don't know what type of leverage they're trying to get in order to get the CCC funding back into the what we call the CR, continuing resolution. I think it'll eventually be put back in.
Yeah, and well, of course, we don't really know at this point because we haven't heard anything further from Nancy Pelosi about that tweet, but it's curious what would cause her to oppose expanding or replenishing the CCC, other than possibly what Colin Peterson's been talking about having more control over how that money is spent.
Again, I haven't had time because it was fast breaking to really check our sources out on this, but that could be definitely a potential reason to get more congressional say over the use of some of this money. On the Senate side, you had a long, what we call a colloquy on the Senate floor between Debbie Stabenow and the Republican farm state members about the CCC. While she supports additional funding for the CCC, Stabenow made clear that she's still not happy with the implementation of both the MFP and CFAP 1, that she said it favored, the Southern producers. I personally think she's wrong there, but yet she is consistent in all of her arguments all of the time, and she was making a point.
Indeed, yeah. Jennifer asking if there will be ARC or PLC payments in October.
Yes, there will be. Well, we got to make sure we have the money, but
but you would. I mean, again, according to the calculation, whatever that would require. But this.
Would you mean would they be triggered? Would they be triggered?
Yeah, I don't know if she's asking if they be triggered or if there's money there. There should be money there, just because not all of the CFAP will be paid out.
Yes,
in that timing. So
they'll have enough money, but you don't want to be too close to that cushion, because remember the conservation reserve payments also go out in October, and that's why the White House. Let me take you behind the scenes on wonky terms. The White House, each stopgap spending bill will request what they call anomalies, in which if there's an agreement between the House and Senate and the White House that a stopgap spending measure will be, quote, clean, they still allow for some anomalies, mostly in the emergency end, in order to facilitate what the White House really, really needs. And this was part of the White House request. And that's why we're at this juncture now, whether or not some lawmakers are, wanting to play political angles on this one. But I wouldn't want to be a rural lawmaker going out to their states and saying they help stop, replenishing what is in no other terms like an ATM machine at USDA to help fund these programs, because it's needed.
Yeah, and let's point out the political reality here too is that as much as this can be done before November 3rd needs to be done, because the incentive to do it really lessens after November 3rd.
It does. This could well be the last one for a while, last aid program. And whenever we get the election results, at least for any near term, I think this begins the debate on new farm policy, even though that'll go on for a year or two before we get a new farm bill. You're seeing the makings, John, of a broad concept as we go across the board, not just program crops. I think the beauty about this CFAP 2 now is it's just not the main traditional program crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, barley, cotton, rice, etc., sorghum, etc. Now it's expanding to other parts of agriculture, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Every 5 years when we put together a farm bill, the administration tries to have an influence in that. Some put together a proposed farm bill, others just have some sort of framework. It will be interesting to see if this USDA actually provides the actual structure for the next farm bill by putting in place CFAP 1 here.
Well, usually in my history of watching 10 farm bills, by the way. I've seen it's best when USDA is console analytically, financially to farm state lawmakers, because I like to see it go through the various subcommittees, the normal congressional process in consort with USDA. But I know Colin Peterson thinks, and I somewhat agree with him, that it's tilted too much to the executive branch, and in this case, USDA as well, in formulating the language, how much money, etc. So I think if the Democrats retain control of the House, Colin Peterson is pretty effective in keeping control. So I don't see him with open arms wanting the White House proposal, but he'll work with anyone, I think.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that necessarily that Congress will fully accept the White House proposal. What I am saying, though, is it will be unusual if this looks like a winning structure long term for the basis for a next farm bill.
Some concepts, yeah. Anything that works in this town, they grab on it and call their own. A lawmaker, they'll say they told USDA to do it. You're seeing that in the debate we had this week again on the renewable fuel standard waivers, that once Trump signed off and instructed EPA to deny them, at least the majority of them, 54 of the 68,
right?
Then the Democrats came out and said, well, it was Biden's letter on this issue that forced the White House to announce what they did. So that's called 101. That's called noise, by the way. No.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, no, it wasn't Biden's letter. It was the repeated statements by the Iowa corn growers that had
Absolutely.
an impact there. Yes. Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that decision. Again, not to get too far down in the weeds, but just so people understand, there were 68 of these so-called gap year waivers that EPA was considering. They're called gap year because of that 10th Circuit Court decision that said that no, these small refinery exemptions couldn't be new. They had to be an extension of an existing exemption. So all the oil companies that had waivers for years after 2011 started filing for the years, those gap years in between 2011 and when they had applied later. And so 54 of those applications had made it through the Department of Energy. Another 14 are still waiting at Department of Energy. EPA said that they were denying the 54 that had been reviewed by DOE. And the reasoning that they gave in that ruling leads us to believe that they will deny the other 14. It would be very hard for them to not deny the other 14 after they've denied these 54. Yes. There are still, Jim, I believe between 30 and 40 waivers for 2019 and 2020 that are still pending at EPA. Again, I would think it'd be, with the reasoning that they gave for these gap year waivers, I think it would be very difficult for them to approve 2019 and 2020 waivers.
Well, unless there's an open and shut case where an individual smaller, that's key, refiner really was in financial trouble, John, because that's really what the basis of this is all about, to aid a sector who's really down, not if they're affiliated with a major oil company who had a record year or whatever, and in some cases that was the case. But just like in a farmer disaster aid program, I think it's okay to help out individual producers, and in this case companies, if a case can be made. So I think 2019 and 2020 will not be as easy to predict as these other 14, where I totally agree with you. The signal we got from the announcement was that those should be also nixed.
That's interesting. There could still be some life for some of this 19 or 20.
Some.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, and talking about your assistance to the industry, story that's been floated this week is that there would be some $300 million go to the oil industry as somewhat of an offset of the impact of loss of these waivers. And the kicker here is that money would come from CFAP funds that have not been CFAP 1 funds that haven't been used so far. Is there any reality to that rumor, Jim?
Well, initially, I do believe that I know that the White House is mulling, as we say, is considering cash aid assistance to small refiners as an offset, if you will, of the final decision, let's hope, to nix the majority of these waivers. What I don't agree with is the true conjecture that if those funds are coming up to 300 million, that they would be taken out of either the CFAP funding that we've already talked about or out of the Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act. That opens up, and you saw it this week on the House and Senate floor, where both Republicans and Democrats cried foul on that from farm states that said no, and it just wouldn't pass the logic test, because USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue can't at one side say he can't offer financial assistance to livestock producers who had to cull their herds, to a degree due to the processing conundrum that we were in earlier this calendar year, nor could he give assistance to the ethanol industry from the CCC Charter Act, because the lawyers told him he didn't have that authority. Now, ipso facto, you can't do it out of the blue. Now, we've known that that's happened before under the Trump administration, but there is so much money floating around this government that I know they can tap some Treasury Department funding that they could probably, I'm not going to say $300 million is nothing nowadays, but in the era that we're talking trillions, not billions, 300 million, I think they can find it elsewhere, John.
Yeah, they can find it elsewhere. We talked with Jeff Cooper, CEO of the Renewable Fuels Association, earlier on this week, and he became very animated when he talked about pulling $300 million from CCC to pay the oil companies because of the things you brought up. They've been trying to get CCC money as COVID relief and been told repeatedly that processors aren't eligible. Well, if processors aren't eligible, then how can oil processors be eligible in this?
And as we always look under a new approach in any government outlay, if they were to do that, that sets a precedent where all sorts of industries can tell the White House and Congress, well, you have the funding, it's called CCC. I said years ago, when no one even hardly knew what the Commodity Credit Corporation Charter Act, except us wonks, I called the White House once when Reagan was in and said, hey, you can fund the Contras through the CCC, and they laughed.
But who knows if they did or not at this point.
We'll never know.
We'll never know. Only Ollie North knows.
Yes.
But maybe Jeff Cooper is taking the wrong tack on this. Maybe he should be fighting for the oil industry to get that money so that he can and his members can get access. Yeah,
he can tap it. Yeah, but boy, the more you use it, it'll get Colin Peterson even more upset. But you had Senator Grassley coming out this week scathing if they were to do that. Senator Joni Ernst. You had Stabenow, passionate. I love passionate people. She was passionately saying, "I hope they better not do that." So again, sometimes you wonder if the White House gets signals. I don't care whether they're Democrat or Republican, but they should have got the clear signal they better not utilize the CCC Charter Act for any cash financial assistance to the refiners.
Indeed. Well, and not really great timing to mess with that and upsetting Congress when you're working on a CR and a next COVID aid package.
Yes, and then, but we saw the report. I was pretty scathing in my column this morning. You had Stabenow release a general accountability report under the operation of the MFP, Trade Mitigation Program, but the timing, it's just gutter politics. It's just, this is how Washington works and doesn't work. And so again, it is what it is, but I took fault with some of the comments that I think the MFP was as fair as it possibly could be. But you know how you can use figures. They went with average payment rates, and by far the majority of the money from the trade mitigation went to the Midwest. So this is just Washington 101. If you're from Michigan, you look at the southern states, and particularly to tweak Secretary Perdue, since he's from Georgia, and you make a case, for it. But it's gutter politics.
Yeah, there wasn't anything new in that. I mean, we knew what the distribution was. They looked past the explanations of the analysis that USDA did to come up with those particular distributions. So,
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you that it was a purely political move coming out right now, just before the election. Well, let's talk about COVID aid. Last week, I was buying funeral wreaths for it. You were a little more hopeful. Now we're seeing signs that both sides are ready to talk again. Has this thing raised from the grave?
I still weakly believe there was a case, because I wouldn't want to either be a Republican or a Democrat if this Congress really adjourns until after elections in a lame duck session to go to the American public, and not just agriculture, to the small business people, and tell them that they couldn't come together in a topic in which the Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell, constantly is telling them they need more assistance in order to help the overall U.S. economy, and at the bottom end, a lot of people and businesses. I just cannot see it. It's politics at its worst. Pelosi is not giving in yet from the $2.2 trillion area. The White House is starting to change. First,
and I think really surprised Republican senators with that announcement.
Well, when Trump said, go higher, go higher. Trump is a spender. He's when it comes to spending, he is definitely not a Republican. There's not too many conservative Republicans anymore when it comes to spending. So, there's still hope, but there's only so much time, John, between now and getting that done before they hit the road for these November 3rd elections. But I'm not gonna deep six it yet. They're talking, and that's half the ball game right there. They're jockeying for a total number. You can change the time frame on some of these programs. In other words, have the same amount of money but have less time. So there's ways that they can seek, I think, a compromise. So let's hope that's the case. As a taxpayer, I don't like to see all this spending, but boy, when it comes to restaurants and small businesses and airports, which I think are strategic in nature to this great country, I think it's needed. So usually wisdom prevails even in DC. So let's hope I'm right.
Well, and you've got the Fed Chairman Powell saying that we need to keep pumping money into this economy. And I don't think he'd be saying that just in a downturn, but when you've got a situation like this where you can see that there will eventually be an end to it, we need to provide these small industries a chance to survive until we hit that end.
I agree. We just need to get the country moving again and the world moving again. You saw the case in the ripple effects in trade where China started to buy some U.S. cotton in the weekly export sales report, a pretty robust purchase. That was a result of China finally getting their textile people back to work because they weren't getting any new orders, John. And now that the world is slowly, I'm not saying it's totally back. Not anywhere close, but they're finally getting orders for textiles, and so they need the underlying cash cotton base. And I think you're going to see that if we get some additional assistance, not only in the U.S., but around the world, we're going to see it slowly start moving back to whatever normal is in the future.
All right, you brought up the C word. We have to talk about it every week, and there is a significant amount to talk about this week, and that's China. Well, first of all, on the political front, not a whole lot of rancor back and forth, other than the Trump administration saying that they're going to block the app stores from carrying TikTok in the U.S. Starting, I guess, this weekend, which certainly ramps up some of the rhetoric there. But probably the biggest news is continuing to follow up on this WASDE report from a couple of weeks ago, where they were still projecting 7 million metric tons.
7 million tons. All Chinese imports from all nations. Now, you want to see passion on a topic? You're going to see passion from me on this one.
All right.
I have covered the World Board since it started. World Board is the arbitrator, if you will, of USDA's demand estimates, NASA's production. The World Board has different committees, feed grains, livestock, etc. And they started, I think, in 76. So I'm well aware of the World Board. I totally respect them. I like the people who work there, but I think that they're making a colossal blunder here. When
and let me frame this just a little bit. Their projection was 7 million metric tons. There are already commitments for 8, almost 9 million metric tons.
Over 9 for corn
okay.
right now. 9, whatever they announced today, too. I mean, we're probably 9.5 million tons just from the U.S. But here's what gets me confused to say, what's going on at USDA? Because on February the 6th, USDA's economists put out now remember that was after the January 15th announcement of the Phase 1 agreement, agriculture, between U.S. and China. On February the 6th, I guess it was in the WASDE, they put out that they were going to monitor export sales and then adjust accordingly. Then in the latest WASDE, they didn't put it in the report, which I thought was one of their many mistakes lately in this area. It was on a blog site or whatever. The top economist apparently said that they were going to use shipments. They had to wait until shipments. Why? Are they forecasting China cancellations? I mean, you don't change the metric, but they did. But I'll even get more passionate. I did more research on this one. I was back in my wire service days where we had to really research and call as many sources. We called ProFarmer China watchers in multiple nations, Hong Kong, just around the world, and to the person, they were considerably above USDA's number, to such a degree that most were at the 25 to 30 million ton area of total Chinese imports 2020 to 2021, where my exporter sources in the U.S. were right in that around 25 to 27. Isn't USDA, I'm not saying you have to take their word, but boy, you talk about signals adding up. Actually, the trade's worried whether or not our logistics is going to be up to speed if we get much over 20 million tons of U.S. corn, U.S. only corn, going to China in 2021, both from the Gulf and into the PNW area. So, and I'm scratching my head saying USDA's literally hanging out there with 7 million tons. When are they going to change and face reality? This is affecting the corn producers. I frankly think you would have higher prices, both in the cash and the futures market, if USDA was more realistic. And I don't take great joy in chastising the USDA's World Board, but there's something wrong there relative to this topic.
Well, is this signaling that the World Board thinks that maybe China's not going to follow through on a significant number of those commitments?
Well, that's what I wrote. Are they forecasting cancellations? But I called many departments, not just USDA, and I can't say who they are, and they're scratching their head as well. So they need to come, a little bit more forceful, and hopefully the next WASDE will have a box with a further explanation, rather than having to watch a blog thing on the internet, which I usually question myself, to be truthful, unless it's from us. But there's more questions than answers on this, and I rarely have seen USDA so far out on this. Let's just go through the reasons that the top ag guy at the U.S. Trade Reps office, Greg Dowd told us months ago. China's look at they're building up their hog sector again, so they're going to need more soybean meal, and corn. They've had a mandate over there to stop using swill garbage, if you will, so that's going to necessitate an additional protein, including corn. They have to rebuild their domestic stocks of corn because they're whittled down. There's quality problems, etc. They have to build up their strategic stocks. That's from a national security basis, and the China's corn crop is having problems similar to the derecho that we had in Iowa and Illinois and other parts earlier this year. So I mean, you talk about signals. I thought I wrote in my special report on Proforma. I ended it with, well, if USDA is going to wait for the shipments, and if they're going to be over 20 million metric tons, that's just like USDA forecasting a football game score after the game is over. I mean, what are they over there for? Are they over there just to wait until they have the absolute shipment data? No, I just don't think that's their viable reason to do that. So, and these numbers are market sensitive. So yes, they should at least show direction increase. You've got Ukraine. I was told as of that would have been yesterday, very good export sources, that China's imports of corn on the books, total worldwide, as of yesterday, was 22 million tons, of which 12 is from the U.S. Now that's news I haven't reported yet. Okay,
got it here first, folks.
Yeah, China's imports of whey are up 40%. I'm looking at numbers here. Total dairy, they're up 27%. But I want to go back to whey. What is whey used for in a way? Starter rations for baby pigs. So again, these are starting to add up as logical reasons why they're in a protein binge right now. Again, this is why I'm just throwing up my hands and saying I've never seen USDA be this far off the spread of the major trade sources who that's their business. Yeah. They're buyers and sellers. And you recall a couple of weeks ago when I told the story on Signal to Noise about Willard Sparks, the most intelligent person I've ever known in my life in agriculture. He has departed, but I wish he was around today because he came back from a trip to China, I think it was 2001, and that was the beginning of their move into the bean complex for imports. They used to import the finished products, but China knew that it was a jobs program for them to crush the beans, and they had their estimate of China soybean imports at the time, I think, was 9 million tons, and he told his analysts to double it and to 18. And he was chided. Willard Sparks was chided for that by the trade and from some of it was at the time Sparks Company's clients. And he eventually turned out to be too low, John. Yeah. And Willard also accurately forecast, remember the Great American Grain Robbery? Russia, now he had excellent Russian contacts, and I'll just leave it at that. And he just was spot on in their ferocious appetite for wheat and corn and beans at the time. And so I just remember those types of things where a good researcher can come on to a mega change. And I don't think this is going to be a one-off. With China, they're going to continue to grow and have the needs as their diet improves, as their middle class grows, etc. Now, the one big caveat, of course, is if we have even more dire U.S.-China relationships where it gets to the point where China puts its muscle and starts canceling some of these things. I can't predict that, but that would be a pretty good reason to be wrong on this stuff, because if you can't predict all the time total visceral geopolitics, because I can't rule it out.
This may be a question better suited for Chip Flory, but does this action by the World Board moderate any potential price impact later on when we do fully reflect that 25 million metric tons or whatever it ends up being, because the market already expects it to be at that number?
You still have naysayers out there. But I would bow to Chip on that. He's the market person. I'm a policy person. As I say in my speeches, when you ask a policy person market questions, it's not outlook, it's look out. Okay. But I would say there's still the consensus maybe that, especially in the case of corn and wheat, that they're not going to buy all that much more. I just think that's absolutely wrong. If they do,
Chip's listening. He just commented. He says, yes, it's being factored in right now.
Yeah.
So there you go.
There.
All right.
Well, you watch your basis, you watch your premium. I think that what you normally would have premium basis, they're going to go further premium. They'll narrow the spreads in other areas. And then you watch your transportation rates, because these companies are going to have to start booking the transportation. You're going to see transportation rates go up, and that'll be another indication. Chip, I know Chip knows that. He's taught me that.
Indeed. And Eric, if you'll throw up the latest comment from Chip there, says Steve Freed, who Chip had on AgriTalk PM the other day, says that the last 20 cents of that corn rally was tied to the China sales.
So that's good perspective. Good perspective.
That is good perspective. Thanks, Chip, for that. And thanks to everybody who's been commenting on here. We haven't gotten to all of them, but we
get to a few more. I like this instant feedback, whether it's pro or con.
Well, I had several comments about interactions with FSA offices, and actually some people citing some frustration about not being able to get answers from FSA offices, which can vary quite a bit from county to county. But I know, Jim, and you're in my experience, usually those local county folks are the most reliable, if not overworked.
They're unsung heroes in many cases. And also, I've talked to a number of FSA, either state directors or county offices, where they, in some cases, I don't say many, they've had retirements and they've had a little more difficulty rehiring and training, and to get up to speed on farm program is not,
especially as quickly as they've been changing the last couple of years.
Is not an easy topic, but that's why news services such as ProFarmer, AgWeb, Farm Journal, and your other services are hopefully doing their job to work in consort with the very good people at the Farm Service Agency.
Yeah, and as somebody Chad Ingles points out, FSA county offices are usually the last to know about. So the program changes, and you're right about that, and that is unfortunate.
Yes.
But again, these programs have been changing so quickly, and so little time between. Well, like now, we're seeing CFAP 2 announced today. Sign up starts on Monday. That leaves no time for training or even a heads up for those FSA county offices.
I totally agree, and that is a problem. The week that we had the delay in announcing this, remember, Sonny Perdue predicted last week. Now, when an ag secretary does not know the timing of a report, I'm not even going to fault him, because you know what I'm not saying they were the problem, but it was stuck over at the Office of Management and Budget longer than what they thought it would be. And they signed off on it Wednesday this week. And look, they got final clearance then Thursday, and then the president, of course, they informed the president, by the way. I will give you a tidbit that Bob Lighthizer at the U.S. Trade Rep's office, I forgot to tell you this, every day, if there's a China purchases, Trump knows about it, because Lighthizer tells him. Isn't that interesting? Every day. Yes.
That is interesting.
Every day. Yes. Little behind the scenes.
And I want to circle. Yeah, you reminded me of somebody. I want to circle back on back to the ethanol discussion that I forgot to cover there, and that is that you said very, very passionately to watch that Iowa campaign schedule. Ultimately, the Trump campaign decided to not make the ethanol waivers a campaign event. Why is that?
It got too touchy basis, the win-win. strategy, is what I was told afterwards, saying, yeah, why isn't he in Iowa doing that? And that's when I think they were actively discussing this potential cash aid program for the refiners. And they just didn't want to get too on one side of both issues on this one, because frankly, there are both issues. The corn ethanol people always say follow the law, and I totally agree with that. However, there are some, not many, small refiners that were in economic problems, but Trump's looking at both the Iowa and the Texas area, and the Democrats are becoming more competitive. I'm not saying the Republicans are going to lose Texas, but they are becoming more competitive relative to demographics. So I just think Trump's political nerves said, I'm going to just say, I'll be strong in saying I've directed the EPA to come out and nix this. And then we had the ethanol people say they wanted to hear Wheeler say it. Well, we got that this week. So, so there you are. So that's what I was told. I think it would have been better for him to go to Des Moines, Iowa, or someplace like that and announce this. But he didn't. I
do too. I don't think that would have cost him any votes in Texas or Oklahoma. And I think it would certainly have helped him in Iowa, especially since, when the announcement was made, it wasn't clear if it were, how many of the waiver requests they were denying. And it took a long time to get to the root of what they were actually announcing. And so it wasn't, nor did they coordinate the timing with biofuels groups. You did not see biofuels groups coming out immediately with releases praising this. In fact, the national corn growers were still fairly critical of the administration, even on the back end.
They wanted the 14. Well, the corn growers and biofuel people are very good complainers, to be blunt, and they're very unhappy a lot. I just hope we get to the era again where they're happy, and I know if they were here, they'd say if they followed the law, they would be ecstatic, because the RFS is really the corn producer's holy grail. Now, that can be a problem, too, if you rely on one government program too much. I remember in wheat country, Farmarco is no longer with us. They were bought out by Farmland years ago. Once a board member told me, once he found out that their X% of their profits was based on a government program, at the time it was called Transportation Assistance Program, he got nervous. And he was correct, because eventually that was cited as a program to cut, and look at it, just dug into their equity. So, things like that can happen if you rely too much on a government, program, John. I do want to get to at least Steve Cynski if we can.
I was going to bring that up as the last one, because you were right months ago. When Ryan Finley was out at American Soybean Association as their CEO back in June, you said, look for Steve Cynski to leave USDA to come back to ASA. You were right.
You know why?
Why?
I have a big gut, and it was my gut feeling. I just smelled I said, boy, this is odd. I know Steve has worked so hard, and as I said on AgriTalk, that number 2 spot is a hard-working position, because they literally almost have to be there every day. Once in a while, Steve would go out and speak when we could go out and speak. He's the glue. That position is the glue that holds USDA together. Looks at the budget, deals with the Hill, things like that. But once I heard the other guy was out, I thought, oh my goodness, this is a natural transition for Steve to go back to where he was the CEO, 23 years, I think? It was a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's very good at what he does. So it just made sense to me. Sometimes logic will actually work, John.
And hats off to Steve Cynski. It is a very tough job, and you have heard virtually nothing about him in the past 3.5 years, which is exactly what you want out of that position. So I've always said that the way any agency like that works best is you have a director or secretary or whatever that is the public face of the agency, and then you have a chief of staff who actually takes care of the mundane day-to-day stuff that that an agency director really shouldn't be dealing with, because they need to be out there being the public face. And Steve Censky has done a tremendous job of, as they say, keeping the trains running on time at USDA.
Yes, and Sonny Perdue and President Trump should really like him because he doesn't leak.
No.
He doesn't leak information. He's hard. But that's why people respect him. And he's very bipartisan, but his whole life has been that way. I mean, I've been both a friend and a reporter of him for many years. So he'll be in the near future going back to ASA. And
November 9th.
They got a good one again. Yeah, they got a good one. They got a good one back.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what USDA does in the interim. Obviously, the election will be the story to tell on that if they are going to backfill that position. But boy, it may be a tough couple of months for Sonny Perdue if Trump loses the election and they aren't able to have anybody in that position. It suddenly becomes a lot of management on your table.
Sometimes you go to a career person who's been in and out of a lot, and I would suspect that. I'm not quite sure, but I do suspect that.
Yeah, and big shoes to fill if the Trump administration carries on in a second term. We'll be interested to watch the process to fill that position.
And bottom line on election stuff, John, look, where both Biden and Trump are visiting Minnesota this week. That ought to tell you something. It could boil down. It could come, if it's going to be close, if it is, it could boil down to Minnesota. Believe it or not.
What did we say last week?
Yeah. Who would have thunk that? Who would have thunk it?
Who would have? And we're just a little over a week away now from our first debate, which, as we said last week, again, is going to be probably the most telling events of this election cycle.
Yes, and Chris Wallace is the moderator. Yeah. So we'll see what topics, how much foreign policy, things like that.
How much coherency on either side?
Yes. It can go both ways. It can go, will Trump overdo it, as he's wont to do? Will he get too aggressive? And Biden, if he just does okay, that's a victory for him, as far as I'm concerned, because of low expectations of him going into the September 29th debate in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch. All right, as we do every week, Jim, where are you watching for signal in the coming week?
Oh, continued rally in the soybean market. I'm good relative to China. We're at levels we have not seen since 2018, John, in soybeans. Going to continue to penetrate the China angles relative to the logistics that my veteran sources keep telling me to, look at. I'm also, of course, looking to the implementation of CFAP 2, and I've already got probably 20 questions from individual farmers and consultants to farmers relative to CFAP 2. So I'll run them by people like Bill Northey, Brad Carman, an excellent guy at the FSA. If you want to know an answer to a CFAP question, ask Brad Carman.
Yeah, and Chip Flory weighing in on the comments on what he's watching for the coming week, and that's his Cubs.
I'm not talking baseball this year. It's just the lost season for the National. So no,
I think we'll let Chip do all the talking.
Yeah, we'll let him do the talking.
Or any White Sox fans out there, we'll certainly let them talk. All right. Again, thanks everybody who tuned into the live stream of this. If you enjoyed this, please comment on the Facebook page. Let us know what you thought, and if you'd like us to continue to live stream this production, or if you don't want us to, let us know that too. And as always, you can send us your questions and comments at signaltonoise@farmjournal.com. Jim, thanks for the updates this week. Greatly appreciate it.
It's been fun, and I love this instant feedback from the listeners or viewers, as I should say now. Okay.
Yeah, I've enjoyed watching this too. Although you see me keep leaning forward because I got old man glasses. I got to get them lined up in the right.
Well, I would have to do the same thing. It's called getting older.
Indeed. Well, thanks everybody for joining us this week on DC Signal to Noise.